Good evening. Let's start with a room that does not usually make headlines. It is Vice President JD Vance's office in November, late in the year, after months of private maneuvering. Two men walk in carrying very different ideas about the same thing: artificial intelligence. On one side of that meeting is David Sacks. He is the White House's artificial intelligence and cryptocurrency key czar. He has spent much of 2025 trying to advance a single goal. He wants the federal government to clear the way for artificial intelligence to expand quickly. Not cautiously, not piecemeal, quickly. For months, Sacks had worked to insert language into must-pass federal funding bills. Language that would erase state-level artificial intelligence regulations. Language that would leave Congress with only limited new oversight over the technology. It was an aggressive approach. It relied on the reality that funding bills have to pass. And it was meant to deliver speed, but sitting across from him in that office is Mike Davis, a longtime legal advisor to President Donald Trump, a combative figure, and someone deeply skeptical of Trump's new tech allies. Davis had already played a role in stopping Sacks's efforts twice. Twice he helped rally conservative activists and Republican lawmakers to block the proposed language. Twice, the push stalled. By November, the frustration had built up. Trump himself had begun expressing public irritation at the lack of progress. Artificial intelligence was one of his top priorities, and it was not moving the way he wanted, so the argument moved indoors. Inside that office, according to two people familiar with the meeting, Davis accused Sacks of trying to run over Congress, of trying to impose artificial intelligence on the country without sufficient safeguards. Sacks pushed back. He said he was doing exactly what the president wanted. He said Trump wanted to unleash an artificial intelligence boom, and that Davis was standing in the way. It was not a theoretical disagreement. It was not academic. It was about who gets to decide how fast this technology moves, and who gets to slow it down. At the center of it all is President Donald Trump, because while these two men argued, Trump's position had already been made clear. He wanted acceleration. Earlier in the year, Trump had moved quickly to promote artificial intelligence as an economic engine. His administration had framed the technology as a competitive necessity, especially in relation to China. With Sacks serving as a special advisor, Trump laid out a framework to fast-track AI projects. The administration took a 10% stake in Intel Corporation. It imposed 25% tariffs on foreign chips. These were not symbolic gestures. They were concrete moves designed to push investment and production forward, and Trump was explicit about what he wanted removed from the equation: regulatory friction. When he later signed an executive order on artificial intelligence, Trump explained it plainly. He said that if companies had to secure 50 different approvals from 50 different states, it would not work. He said it would be impossible. That executive order, which came weeks after the meeting in Vance's office, aimed to block states from enforcing their own artificial intelligence regulations. It also directed the administration to work with Congress on creating what it called a single national framework for AI. It was shaped in part by both Sacks and Davis. It reflected compromise, and it is widely expected to face legal challenges. But that moment in the vice president's office mattered because it exposed something deeper. It revealed a fault line inside Trump's own coalition. On one side are increasingly powerful technology leaders and their allies. They see artificial intelligence as transformative. They want speed. They want scale. They want fewer obstacles. On the other side are voters and activists who make up a core part of the MAGA movement. Working-class supporters worried about job disruption. Cultural conservatives focused on child safety. Longtime loyalists who distrust Silicon Valley and what it represents. This is not an abstract divide. It is personal, it is political, and it is growing. After Trump signed the executive order, the reaction was immediate. Steve Bannon, a former Trump advisor and a leading critic of the technology industry, went on his podcast. "We're going to fight like hell," he said, "so don't think that anybody is placated." That quote did not add new facts, it simply captured the temperature. The uneasy alliance that delivered Trump a short-term win did not resolve the conflict. It postponed it. Because while the White House had acted, Congress had not. And the next phase of this fight is already forming. Technology companies are preparing. They have hired hundreds of lobbyists. They have donated millions of dollars to congressional campaigns. They are building AI-friendly super PACs ahead of the midterms. Opponents are preparing too. Inside conservative media spaces, resistance is becoming more organized. Bannon's podcast has become a hub for anti-tech populism. Mike Davis appears there regularly. So does Joe Allen, a leading AI skeptic who has traveled the country urging conservative audiences to push back against tech executives. Allen has warned that these companies are aiming toward something far larger than convenience or efficiency. He has used stark language. They are ultimately aiming toward building sand gods, he said. And I fear there are enough credulous people in the world that whatever comes out of these research projects will be worshipped as a god. Again, not an opinion layered on top of facts. Just a window into how this is being framed to audiences that matter politically. And there is data showing why this matters. A Pew Research Center poll from September found that half of Americans say they are more concerned than excited about artificial intelligence's growing role in their lives. Only 10% said they feel more excited than concerned. That concern is not limited to one party. Across communities, local leaders are responding to pressure to slow or block AI projects, especially data centers. Candidates are increasingly blaming rising utility bills on energy-hungry technology companies. So when David Sachs argues that conservative disdain for AI is misguided, he is responding to something real. He has said that this skepticism comes from hostility toward big tech dating back to the pandemic and fears about social media. I don't think that people on the right who are concerned about civil liberty should want the government to play this super intrusive role in AI, he said on his podcast. That argument is now colliding with another reality. Public sentiment is shifting. Political incentives are shifting with it. And that meeting in JD Vance's office was not just a disagreement between two advisors. It was a signal that this debate is no longer contained, a signal that it is moving out into the open. And that brings us to what happens next. So after that executive order is signed, something else becomes clear. The conflict does not dissolve, it multiplies. Because while the White House frames artificial intelligence as an engine of growth, resistance is spreading outward, not inward. It is coming from governors, from senators, from activists who do not see this technology as neutral. The first visible rupture appears in Congress, when language barring state-level artificial intelligence regulations surfaces inside a budget reconciliation package tied to President Trump's legislative agenda. The reaction is swift. 17 Republican governors sign a letter. They do not hedge. They do not ask for revisions. They call on Congress to strip the language entirely. At the state level, the pushback becomes more explicit. In Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis moves forward with proposals to establish state safeguards around artificial intelligence. He does not wait for Washington. He does not soften the message. We're not going to give up any rights, he declares. In the Senate, Josh Hawley begins holding hearings. He uses them to confront artificial intelligence executives directly. The focus is not innovation, it is child safety. This is not a fringe rebellion, it is a pattern. Republicans who once echoed Trump's economic message are now weaving anti-tech positions into their political identities. They are discovering that skepticism toward artificial intelligence resonates with voters. And that creates pressure not only for the president, but for his vice president. JD Vance has long occupied a complicated space. He has deep ties to Silicon Valley. He also built his political rise on populist credibility. The meeting between David Sachs and Mike Davis in his office is not incidental. It is illustrative. It shows the tension Vance must manage between donors and voters, between acceleration and restraint. Steve Bannon, watching this unfold, frames the moment bluntly. The path to power in America is through the anti-tech oligarch gate, he says. You have to be hard, consistent, and authentic. It is not a prediction. It is a warning. Even among artificial intelligence's most vocal champions, there is a growing awareness that something is slipping. Public trust. Narrative control. In December, David Sachs and his co-hosts on the All In podcast acknowledge as much during a conversation with Tucker Carlson. Carlson presses them repeatedly. He raises concerns about energy consumption, about job displacement, about losing control of the technology altogether. He also ridicules the way artificial intelligence has been introduced to the public. "Who's in charge of the marketing for this?" Carlson asks. "I don't know," Sachs replies. "Me?" It is a moment that lands because it reveals vulnerability. The industry has not persuaded the public. It has not reassured them. And as that realization sets in, the White House adjusts its posture. The final executive order Trump signs looks different from the draft that leaked in November. The differences are not cosmetic. The earlier version would have asserted sweeping federal authority. The final version pulls back. Instead of sidelining Congress, it explicitly says the administration must act with Congress on a national artificial intelligence standard. It also excludes state protections for minors. It excludes regulations of data centers. Those carve-outs matter. They are concessions long demanded by Mike Davis and others aligned with him. After the order is signed, Davis goes on Bannon's podcast. His tone is confident. "We're very much at the table in driving this process," he says. He does not elaborate on his private discussions with White House officials. He declines to talk about the meeting in Vance's office. But he does add one thing. "But David Sachs is a good man who is working with me in good faith for the best AI policy for President Trump." The statement is careful. It acknowledges cooperation without erasing conflict. Sachs, for his part, does not respond to requests for comment. Meanwhile, the focus shifts decisively to Capitol Hill. For much of 2025, lawmakers had been spectators. Internal White House debates dominated the process. Congress was effectively sidelined. That changes after the executive order. A Republican Senate staffer with knowledge of the negotiations describes it plainly. The order, the staffer says, should be the kick in the pants lawmakers need to act. Momentum begins to build. Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, who has worked closely with Davis, prepares to introduce new national artificial intelligence rules. At the same time, President Trump taps Senator Ted Cruz of Texas to take the lead on legislation. Cruz is aligned with the technology industry. His selection signals that the president still wants speed. But the terrain is no longer controlled. Any legislation will need Democratic votes to clear the Senate, and Democrats are not unified. Earlier, they had banded together to block artificial intelligence language from the reconciliation package. Beyond that, their strategy remains unsettled. Some Democrats are optimistic about the technology's potential. Others want aggressive regulation. Even if a Senate deal emerges, it must pass the House, and it must get through Majority Leader Steve Scalise. Scalise has tried before. Last year, he attempted to attach a blanket ban on state artificial intelligence laws to the National Defense Authorization Act. That effort failed after Davis, Blackburn, and others mobilized opposition. After multiple defeats, artificial intelligence advocates quietly begin urging a change in approach. No more sweeping bans, no more maximalism. They understand the political landscape is shifting. Late in the year, a pro-Trump super PAC releases internal polling. The data suggests Americans want Congress, not states, to set artificial intelligence policy. But it also shows overwhelming support for legislation that protects children. The message is mixed, and it is instructive. A person familiar with the strategy says the polling was meant to signal a path forward, one that could satisfy big tech while addressing concerns from the pro-family wing of the Republican Party. But even that path is narrow. One Republican working with groups advocating against state regulations calls the environment a minefield. "We represent working people," the person says. "If we're not sensitive towards the impact on jobs, no question, there's going to be political cost. If we're not sensitive to protecting children, no question, there will be political cost." Then comes the quiet acknowledgement. "I think the president's aware of that." That awareness does not simplify the choices ahead. It complicates them. Across the country, resistance is becoming visible in physical ways. Signs appear along rural roads opposing massive data center projects. Local communities organize. These are not ideological debates abstracted from daily life. They are about land use, energy bills, employment. They are about who benefits and who bears the cost. And as these concerns accumulate, the artificial intelligence debate inside the Republican Party stops being theoretical. It becomes electoral. The technology is no longer just an economic tool or a national security asset. It is a test of how far the party will go to satisfy donors, a test of how closely it will listen to its base. And as the fight moves fully into Congress, the stakes sharpen. Because this is no longer about drafting language quietly, it is about choosing a direction publicly. And that choice is coming sooner than many expected. By the time this fight reaches its current form, it no longer belongs to any one office. Not the Oval Office. Not the Vice President's suite. Not even the White House itself. It belongs to the system now. What began as a months-long internal struggle over language and federal funding bills has hardened into something broader. A reckoning inside a political movement. And a question that has no clean answer yet. Who decides how far artificial intelligence goes? On Capitol Hill, lawmakers are now fully aware that they are being watched. By voters who are uneasy. By industries that are heavily invested. By activists on both sides who believe the stakes are existential. For the first time in this process, Congress is not merely reacting. It is being forced to lead. A Republican Senate staffer, involved in the negotiations, described the shift plainly. For most of 2025, Congress had been sidelined while factions inside the White House debated how much authority to give technology executives and their allies. That era is over. The executive order President Trump signed changed the tempo, not because it settled the issue, but because it made clear that the issue cannot be settled by executive action alone. Lawmakers now face a landscape shaped by compromise and constraint. Any national artificial intelligence framework must navigate competing demands. It must satisfy technology companies seeking uniform rules. It must address voters demanding safeguards. It must survive judicial scrutiny. And it must pass through a Congress that is internally divided. The House and Senate are not aligned. Republicans are not aligned. Democrats are not aligned. Even the artificial intelligence industry, flush with cash and influence, understands its leverage has limits. In recent years, industry leaders have learned how to operate in Washington. They have hired lobbyists. They have funded super PACs. They have supported candidates. Greg Brockman, the co-founder and president of OpenAI, gave $25 million to the pro-Trump super PAC MAGA Inc. last year. Another super PAC, Leading the Future, backed by industry interests, has raised roughly $100 million to target candidates critical of artificial intelligence. These are not small sums, they reflect seriousness. But advocates privately concede that money alone will not resolve this. The narrative itself is under strain. Former Arizona Senator Kyrsten Sinema, who launched the AI Infrastructure Coalition this year, puts it in human terms. She says many Americans are scared of artificial intelligence because they do not understand it. AI companies haven't done the most excellent job of helping people see AI in their daily lives, she says. That story needs to be told. The phrasing is revealing, not a pitch, not a defense, a need. At the same time, some of the most visible figures associated with artificial intelligence are offering visions of the future that land unevenly with the public. Elon Musk argues that within 2 decades, automation and robotics will make work optional. That humans will have everything they need, that most people will live on a universal income. Jason Calacanis, an angel investor and co-host of the All In podcast alongside David Sachs, calls for a modern Manhattan project. 10 new cities, 10 million new homes, free healthcare, free education for trade schools. That's what solves the problem, Calacanis says. That's what nobody's doing. These ideas are expansive, they are ambitious. They are also unsettling to some of the loudest critics. Joe Allen dismisses Calacanis's proposal as a plan for how to replace everyone while keeping the population placated. Tucker Carlson says that such utopian visions are what offend him most about the artificial intelligence conversation. These reactions matter because they shape the emotional environment lawmakers operate in. Fear is not abstract here. It is tied to jobs, to children, to energy use, to community identity. In rural Michigan, a sign opposing a $7 billion data center appears along a country road. It does not cite ideology. It does not cite policy. It simply says no. Across the country, similar moments are accumulating. Local opposition, municipal delays, rising utility bills attributed to data centers. This is the texture of the debate now. Inside Washington, that texture translates into caution. Artificial intelligence advocates who once pushed for sweeping federal preemption are urging restraint. They are advising leaders like David Sachs and Steve Scalise to move away from blanket bans on state regulation, not because they have abandoned their goals, but because the terrain has changed. A pro-Trump super PAC's polling shows voters prefer Congress to set artificial intelligence rules rather than a patchwork of states. But the same polling shows overwhelming support for protecting children. That duality defines the challenge. A person familiar with the strategy behind the polling says it was designed to show a possible route forward, one that balances industry priorities with family-focused concerns. But balance is fragile. One Republican working with groups opposed to state regulations describes the political environment as unforgiving. "We represent working people," the person says, "and if we're not sensitive towards the impact on jobs, no question, there's going to be political cost. If we're not sensitive to protecting children, no question there will be political cost." Then comes the line that lingers. I think the president's aware of that. Awareness does not guarantee resolution. President Trump has shown he wants speed. He has shown he wants scale. He has shown he is willing to confront states and courts to get there. He has also shown, through the final version of his executive order, that he recognizes limits. Limits imposed by politics, by public opinion, by the structure of government itself. The order that emerged was narrower than initially planned. It acknowledged Congress. It preserved certain state protections. It was not everything David Sachs had sought. It was more than Mike Davis had initially accepted. It was, in the end, a truce. But truces do not end conflicts. They mark pauses. Now the pause is ending. As legislation is drafted and hearings are scheduled, lawmakers are stepping into a debate that has already been emotionally charged. They are doing so knowing that artificial intelligence is not just another policy area. It is a symbol. For some, it symbolizes national strength and economic dominance. For others, it symbolizes loss of control and erosion of stability. Neither side is speaking hypothetically. And that is why this moment matters. Not because the outcome is clear, but because the process has been exposed. What was once negotiated quietly is now contested openly. What was once framed as inevitable is now questioned. As one critic put it, "You can't just tell people everything will be fine." That line carries no data, no prescription, just a truth about politics. Artificial intelligence is moving forward. That is not in dispute. The question now is who moves with it, and who decides the terms. That question is not answered by an executive order. It is not answered by a super PAC. It is not answered by a podcast. It will be answered slowly, in hearings, in legislation, in elections. And for the first time in this administration, the fight over artificial intelligence is no longer happening behind closed doors. It is happening where power is tested, in public.